I was still wearing my wedding dress when my stepmother leaned in and said it. "Now that you're married," she murmured, her breath soaked in wine and roses, "you really should consider putting that boy in a home." She smiled at me like she'd just handed me some kind of blessing, like I should be grateful. Before I could respond, my father appeared beside her. "It's time to let go of your mistake," he said, not even looking at me, his eyes staring straight past me like I wasn't there at all. That moment lasted less than 10 seconds, but something inside me splintered. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there, frozen, mute, feeling 13 again. 13, when I tried to shrink into nothing while my father scolded me at dinner for crying too loudly. 21, when I found out I was pregnant, and he told me I'd ruined my life. Still hoping, desperately, that one day he'd look at my son and see a person instead of a problem. But I said nothing, not because I agreed, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't trust my voice not to break under the weight of everything I wanted to scream. So I turned and walked away. I made it through the toasts. I smiled when Ethan reached for my hand under the table. I pretended not to notice how my stepmother sat stiff and triumphant, like someone who'd just won something. I laughed when a friend joked about our 6 a.m. honeymoon flight. And all the while, my son, Noah, sat 2 tables away, quietly coloring on the back of a menu with a hotel pen I'd found for him earlier. He didn't say much around large groups. He hadn't spoken since the ceremony. But he was watching. He always watched. When the DJ adjusted the mic for our first dance, Ethan stood and held out his hand to me, smiling with that steady, grounding smile he always had. I stood to meet him. And that's when Noah rose from his chair. He had a folded piece of paper in his hand. His voice rang out, clear and certain. "Before you dance," he said, "I think everyone should read this letter my mom kept hidden." The room went still. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations dropped off. My heart didn't race from fear. It pounded from something deeper. I knew that letter. I had written it 2 years ago, on one of the hardest nights of my life. It wasn't for anyone else to see, especially not Noah. Now my 12-year-old son was standing in front of 100 guests, ready to read something I'd written when I thought I was broken beyond repair. My father's face turned crimson. Veronica, my stepmother, leaned forward like she was going to stop him. But she hesitated, because now everyone was looking. And Noah wasn't afraid. He looked only at me. "I think they should know what kind of mom you really are," he said. And then he began to read. The vineyard that afternoon looked like something from a dream. Olive trees lined the gravel path. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The scent of lavender floated through the garden. I had thought, this must be what peace feels like. It was my wedding day. And for the first time in years, I believed I hadn't ruined everything. The guest list was small. Not because I wanted it that way, but because there were only a handful of people I could count on. Ethan's family made up most of the crowd. They hugged Noah, brought him a small gift for the reception. They didn't ask questions about his autism, didn't judge him for flapping his hands when overstimulated. They just accepted him. I had waited 12 years for that kind of love. Noah was born when I was 21, and every day since, I'd fought for him. His father left before he was born, said he wasn't ready to be a special needs dad, like that was some kind of career path. My own father? Worse. When Noah was diagnosed at 3, he sat across the kitchen table and said, stone-faced, "What did you expect? You've always had bad judgment." From that moment on, he treated my son like a mistake I'd made. Veronica didn't hide her opinions either. She smiled in public, but in private, whispered things like, "Are you sure this isn't just bad parenting?" When Noah melted down as a toddler, she'd sigh, roll her eyes, and act like I was being dramatic. I spent years trying to convince them, telling them about Noah's progress, dressing him neatly, sending photos, always hoping they'd come around. But they never did. They saw him as a disruption, a burden, an anchor. I refused to cut loose. By the time Ethan came into our lives, I had almost given up on the idea that anyone could love us both. I met him at the hospital where I worked. He was visiting a friend. I was checking vitals. It started with small talk, then coffee, then weekends, then everything. He didn't run when I told him about Noah. He leaned in. He listened. He asked questions. He showed up. He brought Noah puzzles, taught him to make pancakes, memorized every line of his favorite books. The first time Noah took Ethan's hand without being prompted, I stood in the kitchen and cried. That was the first moment I truly believed I could be loved. We could be loved, without conditions. That's why, when Ethan proposed, I didn't hesitate. He wasn't just choosing me, he was choosing us. We planned the entire wedding with Noah in mind. Colors, cake, music. He picked the playlist, chose chocolate mint over vanilla, asked to wear sneakers with his navy blue suit because they feel safe and fast. Of course, I said yes. At the end of the aisle, fidget cube in one hand and shoulders tight with nerves, he looked so small. But more than that, he looked safe. And that was all I'd ever wanted for him. For 12 years, I had fought to give Noah safety. Love came later, not from his biological father. He left before Noah was born. Said he wasn't ready to be a special needs dad, like it was some licensed job. My own father was colder. When Noah was diagnosed at 3, he stared at me over his coffee and said, "What did you expect? You've always had bad judgment." From then on, he treated my son like a stain. Veronica never hid how she felt either. She smiled for pictures, but whispered, "Are you sure this isn't just bad parenting?" when he melted down in stores. I spent years trying to prove them wrong. I dressed Noah well, bragged about his good days, updated them on his therapies. I thought if they just saw him, really saw him, they'd understand. But they never did. They saw a disruption, a burden, an anchor I refused to cut loose. By the time Ethan entered our lives, I'd nearly given up on the idea that anyone could love both of us. We met at the hospital where I worked. He was visiting a friend. I was doing vitals. Our first conversation was 5 minutes in a hallway, then coffee, then weekends. He didn't run when I told him about Noah. He leaned in, asked questions, showed up. He brought Noah puzzles, learned how to cook gluten-free pancakes, memorized favorite bedtime books. The first time Noah reached for his hand without prompting, I cried in the kitchen. When Ethan proposed, it was never just about me. He was choosing both of us. That's why I didn't hesitate. We planned the whole day with Noah at the center, and everything felt right until it didn't. The golden hour settled like a blessing over the vineyard. I stood with a wine glass in one hand, watching Ethan chat with his parents. Noah was on a picnic blanket, stacking butter packets, calm and in his own world. Laughter rippled through the guests. Kids ran between tables. It was the first time in years I felt light, really light. Then Veronica approached. Her navy dress was immaculate, makeup flawless. Her heels clicked softly over the patio stones. Her smile was tight and controlled. She waited until no one was around, then leaned in close, voice low and syrupy. "Now that you're married, you should really consider putting that boy in a home." I blinked, thought maybe she was joking, but she wasn't. Her expression didn't flinch. A second later, my father walked up beside her, as if on cue. "It's time to let go of your mistake," he said, matter of fact, like it was a business decision. That's how they saw him, not as a child, not as family, but as a mistake. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't argue. I turned and walked away. Because there was only one person whose voice mattered now, and I knew he had seen everything. I found Noah behind the tent, near a small garden fountain. He was sitting on a bench, fidget cube turning between his fingers. The music and laughter still floated from the vineyard as if nothing had happened. But I felt like I'd been shoved underwater. I sat next to him. He didn't look up. I didn't speak. I could feel the lace of my dress scratching my shoulders, my chest aching from what I'd held in. Then I looked at him. Really looked. His dress shoes were already scuffed. A smear of chocolate stained his tie. His hair was flattened in the back from where he'd taken off his clip-on bow tie an hour ago. He looked perfect. He glanced sideways. "You look sad." "I'm not." I lied. He nodded once, like he knew, but wouldn't press. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The corners were worn soft. "I brought this just in case I needed to remember." I recognized it immediately. My handwriting. That letter. I wrote it 2 years ago during one of Noah's hardest weeks. He wasn't eating. School was a daily fight. One night, after he finally fell asleep, I sat in the living room and wrote, not to give it to him, just to remember who I was, to remind myself that I was still trying. I tucked it into a book we used to read together. I never expected him to find it. "Why'd you bring that?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "Sometimes it helps." My chest tightened. I wanted to tell him what had happened, how his grandparents had told me he should be gone. But I didn't. He had carried enough already. "Hey," I whispered. "You know I'd never leave you, right?" He met my eyes. "I know, but they want you to." Of course he'd heard. Of course he had. He always noticed things others missed. "I heard her say it," he added. "And then Grandpa said it too." Tears welled up fast and hot. He reached for my hand before I could wipe them away. "I don't care what they think," he said. "You shouldn't either." I wrapped my arm around him, pulled him close. Sometimes touch overwhelmed him. But today, he leaned into it. We sat like that until the music called us back. And from that moment on, the night was no longer theirs. It was ours. When the DJ announced our first dance, Ethan rose and offered his hand, smiling. I stood, but before I could step forward, Noah got up. At first, I thought he needed space, but he walked straight to the microphone. Calm, steady, focused, holding that same folded paper in both hands. Without waiting for permission, he spoke. "Before you dance," he said, voice clear. "I think everyone should hear this." My mom kept it hidden. The music stopped. Conversations froze. All eyes turned to him. Ethan took a step, unsure, but I stopped him with a whisper. "Let him." Noah unfolded the letter with quiet care, smoothing it like it was something sacred. "I found this in one of my books," he said. "My mom wrote it. She didn't know I had it. But I think everyone should hear what kind of mom she really is." The silence that followed was total. Not one whisper, not one breath out of place. Then he began to read. "To my sweet Noah." The second I heard those words out loud, my breath caught. I remembered the night I wrote them. I was curled on the couch, a lamp glowing dimly in the corner. Noah had just fallen asleep after hours of crying, sobbing that he didn't want to live at home anymore, asking me if there was a place for kids like him. I'd held him until he calmed. After he finally slept, I wrote, not for him, for me. To remember I was still fighting, that I was still his mom, even when the world made me doubt it. I never imagined it would be read out loud under wedding lights in front of 100 people. But Noah's voice didn't shake. If the world ever makes you feel small or broken, he read, know this. You were never a mistake. You saved my life. Every hard day with you is still the best part of being alive. I will never choose anyone over you. You are not a burden. You are the reason I fight. People stopped pretending to sip their wine. A couple in the back leaned closer together. Ethan stood motionless near the dance floor. Veronica shifted in her seat, her eyes sharp, her jaw tight. My father didn't move, didn't even blink. Noah paused, then looked at me. I'm sorry I took it, he said, but I think they needed to hear it. Then he turned back to the crowd. My mom never said bad things about my grandparents. She just said they didn't understand me. But tonight, I heard what they really think. I heard what they told her behind the tent, that I should live in a home, that I was a mistake. A sharp breath came from someone near the front. Whispers began to ripple, but Noah didn't flinch. He refolded the letter carefully, like it mattered. But I'm not going anywhere, he continued, voice steady. And I'm not sorry I'm here. My mom didn't ruin her life. She gave me mine. The sentence hit the room like thunder. At first, no one moved. Then someone clapped. Ethan's younger sister. Then another guest. Then more. The sound grew. Not polite wedding applause, but something deeper. A line being drawn. A truth being honored. Veronica lowered her glass. My father stood still, mouth thin with fury. Neither clapped. Neither looked at Noah, but Ethan did. He crossed the lawn, stepped onto the platform beside Noah, and put a hand on his shoulder. Then he turned to the crowd. I think that says more about this family than anything else tonight, he said. Then he looked at me. You okay? I nodded. My throat was raw. I'll dance with you when I'm ready, I whispered. I stepped up beside them and cupped Noah's face. He looked at me, eyes wide, still watching, still noticing. You didn't need to protect me, I said. I wasn't, he replied. I was telling the truth. I hugged him tightly, in front of everyone, no longer worried who might feel uncomfortable. He needed to know what he did mattered, that it was brave, that he wasn't too much. A few minutes later, Ethan held out his hand again. I took it. Noah stepped down and went back to his table. Someone, one of Ethan's cousins, handed him a new plate of strawberries. He smiled. As Ethan and I walked onto the dance floor, Veronica called my name. I turned. She stood with arms crossed, face unreadable. I didn't mean it like that, she said loudly, too loud for the moment. I didn't answer. My father added, we were just thinking about your future. And that's when I realized something fundamental had shifted. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer feared losing what I never truly had. The only family I needed was standing beside me. If you see my son as a burden, I said, you don't know me at all. Then I turned back toward the music. Ethan squeezed my hand. The song returned, soft and slow. We danced, and it didn't feel like a wedding tradition. It felt like a declaration, one about love, survival, loyalty, and choosing who belongs at your table. Ethan's hand was warm in mine as we moved across the dance floor, slow and steady. Guests watched, quiet and still, not with pity, but with a new kind of respect. The same people I once feared wouldn't understand now stood frozen, reverent. I didn't take my eyes off Noah. He sat at the table, back straight, a plate of strawberries in front of him. His fingers pulled them apart methodically. Ethan's sister leaned in and whispered something. He smiled. This boy, who once flinched at every loud sound, who used to hide behind my legs when strangers came too close, had just stood in front of a crowd and spoken truth most adults would have swallowed. He didn't hesitate. He didn't soften it. He didn't apologize. That moment wasn't the climax. It was the turn, the moment when everything shifted. But what came after? That was the change. As our dance ended, guests slowly approached. Not with loud praise, but with quiet, sincere voices. A woman I barely knew said, "I wish my mother had fought for me like that." A man in his 50s told me his younger brother had spent most of his life in a group home. "He never got the kind of love your son clearly has," he said. "I don't know what kind of person that made him, but I know what kind of pain it left in me." These weren't compliments. They were confessions. People telling me that something in them cracked open. Not everyone was moved, though. Near the drink station, Veronica pulled me aside again. Her voice was sharp, low. "You let that boy humiliate your family in front of everyone." I didn't flinch. I met her gaze. He told the truth. "You're the ones ashamed of it." My father joined, tone clipped and dismissive. "You're being emotional. This isn't the place for drama." I laughed once, dry, not amused. For years, I had swallowed everything. Every insult, every slight, every calculated dig. I did it to keep the peace. Out of guilt, out of hope. But that moment had passed. Noah had spoken for both of us. Now, it was my turn. "You think he embarrassed us?" I said. "He did what neither of you ever had the courage to do. He stood up for someone he loves." Veronica rolled her eyes. "You're being theatrical." "No," I said. "I'm being a mother." I turned and walked away. Back at the table, Noah was showing Ethan's niece how to create a number pattern he liked. They were giggling. His laughter cut through the night like sunlight through clouds. That sound, it was everything. Later, after cake and bouquet toss, Ethan found me near the patio edge. He slipped his arm around my waist. "You know what the best part of today was?" he asked. "I'm scared to guess," I said, half smiling. He kissed my temple. "Watching Noah become the bravest person in the room, and knowing that came from you." That truth hit deep. For so long, I'd questioned whether I was doing right by Noah, whether I'd made his life harder by keeping him close, whether I should have tried harder to make him easier for the world to accept, quieter, more flexible, more normal. But watching him that night, confident, composed, unafraid, I saw it clearly. He didn't need to be changed. He needed to be believed in. Later, when we were packing up, saying goodbye, Veronica and my father approached Ethan. "You seem like a good man," my father said, "but you might not know what you're signing up for with that boy." Ethan looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, slow, calm, certain. "I know exactly what I signed up for," he said. "A son who stood up for his mom in front of a room full of adults. If that's the hardest part, I'll take it." My father didn't answer. Veronica turned away first. They left without saying goodbye. Not to me, not to Noah. As I watched them walk down the gravel path toward the lot, I didn't feel loss. I felt clarity. This was the price of honesty, of choosing truth over appearances, of no longer making my story digestible for the people who only loved versions of me they could control. We returned to the table. Noah was tired, but calm. He leaned against me, head on my shoulder. "Was that okay?" he asked softly. "You were perfect," I said. He found my hand and held it. We sat that way for a long time, just breathing. That night felt less like the end of something and more like the beginning. The start of a family built not on obligation, but on truth. We didn't see Veronica or my father again after that night. They left without a word and never followed up. No calls, no texts, not even an excuse. For days I kept checking my phone, half expecting some kind of message, apology, anger, anything. But the silence stayed, and strangely, it didn't hurt. Their absence made space for peace. After the wedding, we took Noah with us on our honeymoon. Not because we had to, but because Ethan insisted. I don't want to leave him behind just to match someone else's idea of what a honeymoon should look like, he said. We rented a small cabin near Lake Tahoe. The mornings were quiet hikes through pine trails. The evenings were board games and s'mores by the fire. Noah loved the stillness, the scent of pine, the lack of schedule. One night, Ethan handed him a marshmallow slightly burned at the edges. Noah bit into it, smiled, and said, "It tastes better this way." That sentence, simple, offhand, stopped me. He didn't know it, but it meant everything. For years, I'd feared he'd never embrace change, never find comfort in life's unpredictable corners. I used to hold my breath during every transition, every shift in routine, every unfamiliar place. Now, here he was, not just surviving the chaos, he was finding sweetness in its edges. When we returned home, I framed the letter Noah had read at the wedding. It now hangs in the hallway, outside his bedroom. Every morning, I walk past and read a line or two, not because I still doubt myself, but because I want to honor where we've been, what we overcame, what he reminded me I was capable of. Noah didn't talk much about the wedding afterward. He didn't ask why his grandparents disappeared or whether he'd done the right thing. I think he already knew. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the least willing to see you clearly. That realization used to crush me. I spent years trying to earn my father's respect. Let Veronica's disapproval distort how I saw myself as a mother. Tried to shrink our life to fit a mold that was never made for us. But Noah shattered that mold the night he told the truth. And once it was out there, I didn't need their permission anymore. I didn't need to protect them from discomfort. I only needed to protect my son from the lie that he was less than anyone else. Since the wedding, everything has shifted. Not just with family, but with how I carry myself. I speak up at work. I ask for what I need. I stopped apologizing for being direct. I no longer shape my choices around fear of judgment. My family is smaller now, but it's stronger, and it's real. 3 months after the wedding, Ethan officially adopted Noah. We stood in the county courthouse, Noah in a button-down shirt and clean sneakers, Ethan in a tie he kept adjusting nervously. The judge asked Noah if he wanted to share Ethan's last name. He nodded, then said, "Can I keep Hart too?" The judge smiled and said, "Yes." Noah Blake Hart. It felt exactly right. On the ride home, Noah held the adoption papers like a trophy, quietly staring out the window, humming a tune I didn't recognize. At a red light, Ethan reached back and tousled his hair. Noah smiled, didn't look up. That night at dinner, he asked if he could read the letter again. I handed it to him, already unfolded. He stood in the kitchen, cleared his throat, and began, "To my sweet Noah." His voice was stronger this time, steady, clear. I didn't cry. I just listened. When he finished, he looked up and said, "I'm not a mistake. I know that now." "You never were," I said. He nodded, "But now they know too." That was the final lesson. The truth once spoken can't be taken back. It has weight. It has edges. And when it comes from someone who spent years being underestimated, it cuts through everything false. Noah taught me that silence isn't the same as peace. That fierce love sometimes looks like speaking up when your voice shakes. That family isn't defined by who shares your blood, but by who shows up when it matters. Who chooses you? Who stays? If someone had told me years ago that my son would stand up in front of 100 people to defend me, I wouldn't have believed them. But that's what happens when you raise a child who knows he is safe. He stops hiding. He starts speaking. He tells the truth to rooms that once silenced him. He didn't just save me that night. He reminded me who I've always been, and I won't forget it. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. If you've ever felt torn between keeping the peace and protecting someone you love, I hope this helped you choose what matters. Sometimes courage sounds like a whisper. Sometimes it looks like a child holding a piece of paper and refusing to be small. And sometimes the people we protect the most are the ones who end up saving us.